Well, now you really do surprise me, the youth declared. One lives and learns. Indeed, one does. As a matter of fact, we've been getting an awful lot of it just lately from the butchers in place of pork, the cook declared. Have you really? The trouble is, it's almost impossible to tell which is which. They're both very good. The piece that I just had now was simply superb. I'm glad you liked it, the cook said. To be quite honest, I think that it was a bit of pig. In fact, I'm almost sure it was. You are? Yes, I am. In that case, we shall have to assume that you are right, Lexington said. So will you now please tell me, and here is another 100 for your trouble. Will you please tell me precisely how he prepared it? The cook, after pocketing the money, launched upon a colorful description of how to roast a loin of pork, while the youth, not wanting to miss a word of it, so great a recipe, sat down at the kitchen table and recorded every detail in his notebook. Is that all? He asked the cook when he finished. That's all. But there must be more to it than that, surely. You gotta have a good piece of meat to start off with, the cook said. That's half the battle. It's gotta be a good hog, and it's gotta be butchered right. Otherwise it'll turn out lousy, whichever way you cook it. Show me how, Lexington said. Butcher me one right now so I can learn. We don't butcher pigs in the kitchen, the cook said. That lot you just came from a packing house over in the Bronx. Then give me the address. The cook gave him the address, and our hero, after thanking both of them many times for all their kindnesses, rushed outside and leapt to a taxi and headed for the Bronx. 8. The packing house was a big 4-story brick building, and the air around it smelled sweet and heavy like musk. At the main entrance gates there was a large notice which said visitors welcome at any time, and thus encouraged. Lexington walked through the gates and entered the cobblestone yard which surrounded the building itself. He then followed a series of signposts, this way for the guided tours, and came eventually to a small corrugated iron shed set well apart from the main building, visitors' waiting room. After knocking politely on the door, he went in. There were 6 other people ahead of him in the waiting room. There was a fat mother with her 2 little boys aged about 9 and 11. There was a bright-eyed young couple who looked as though they might have been on their honeymoon. And there was a pale woman with long white gloves who sat very upright, looking straight ahead, with her hands folded on her lap. Nobody spoke. Lexington wondered whether they were all writing cookbooks like himself, but when he put the question to them aloud, he got no answer. The grown-ups merely smiled mysteriously to themselves and shook their heads, and the 2 children stared at him as though they were seeing a lunatic. Soon the door opened and a man with a merry pink face popped his head into the room and said, "Next, please." The mother and the 2 boys got up and went out. About 10 minutes later, the same man returned. "Next, please," he said again, and the honeymoon couple jumped up and followed him outside. 2 new visitors came in and sat down, a middle-aged husband and a middle-aged wife, the wife carrying a wicker shopping basket containing groceries. "Next, please," said the guide, and the woman with the long white gloves got up and left. 7 more people came in and took their places on stiff-backed wooden chairs. Soon the guide returned the 4th time, and then it was Lexington's turn to go outside. "Follow me, please," the guide said, leading the youth across the yard toward the main building. "How exciting this is!" Lexington cried, hopping from one foot to the other. "I only wish my dear Aunt Glosspad could be with me now to see what I'm going to see. I myself would do only the preliminaries," the guide said. "Then I shall hand you over to someone else." "Anything you say," cried the ecstatic youth. First they visited a large pen an area at the back of the building where several hundred pigs were wandering around. "Here's where they start," the guide said, "and over there's where they go in." "Where?" "Right there." The guide pointed to a long wooden shed that stood against the outside wall of the factory. "We call it the shackling pen." "This way, please." Three men wearing long rubber boots were driving a dozen pigs into the shackling pen just as Lexington and the guide approached, so they all went in together. "Now," the guide said, "watch as how they shackle them." Inside the shed was simply a bare wooden room with no roof, and there was a steel cable with hooks on it that kept moving along the length of one wall, parallel with the ground, about 3 feet up. When it reached the end of the shed, this cable suddenly changed direction and climbed vertically upward through the open roof toward the top floor of the main building. The 12 pigs were huddled together at the far end of the pen, standing quietly, looking apprehensive. One of the men in rubber boots pulled a length of metal chain down from the wall and advanced upon the nearest animal, approaching it from the rear. Then he bent down and quickly looped one end of the chain around one of the animal's hind legs. The other end he attached to the hook on the main moving cable as it went by. The cable kept moving, the chain tightened, the pig's legs were pulled up and back, and the pig itself began to be dragged backwards. But it didn't fall down. It was a rather nimble pig, and somehow it managed to keep its balance on 3 legs, hopping from foot to foot and struggling against the pull of the chain, but going back and back all the time until at the end of the pen where the cable changed direction and went vertically upward, the creature was suddenly jerked off its feet and borne aloft. Shrill protests filled the air. "Truly a fascinating process," Lexington said. "But what was that funny cracking noise that went back up?" "Probably the leg," the guide answered. "Either that or the pelvis." "But doesn't that matter?" "Why should it matter?" the guide asked. "You don't eat the bones." The rubber-booted men were busy shackling up the rest of the pigs, and one after another they were hooked to the moving cable and hoisted up to the roof, protesting loudly as they went. "There's a good deal more to this recipe than just picking herbs," Weston said. "Aunt Claus Pen would have never made it." At this point, while Weston was gazing up skyward at the last pig to go up, a man in rubber boots approached him quietly from behind and looped one end of the chain around the youth's own ankle, hooking up the other end of the moving belt. The next moment, before he had time to realize what was happening, our hero was jerked off his feet and dragged backward along the concrete floor of the shackling pen. "Stop!" he cried. "Hold everything! My leg is caught!" But nobody seemed to hear him. And 5 seconds later, the unhappy young man was jerked off the floor and hoisted vertically upward through the open roof of the pen, dangling upside down by one ankle and wriggling like a fish. "Help!" he shouted. "Help! This has been a frightful mistake! Stop the engines! Let me down!" The guy removed a cigar from his mouth and looked serenely at the rapidly ascending youth. But he said nothing. The men in the rubber boots were already on their way out to collect the next batch of pigs. "Oh, save me!" our hero cried. "Let me down! Please let me down!" But he was approaching the top floor of the building where the moving belt curled like a snake and entered a large hole in the wall, a kind of doorway without a door. And there on the threshold, waiting to greet him, clothed in a dark stained yellow rubber apron, and looking for all the world like St. Peter at the gates of heaven, the sticker stood. Lexington saw him only from upside down, but very briefly at that. But even so, he noticed at once the expression of absolute peace and benevolence on the man's face. The cheerful twinkle in the eyes, the wistful smile, the dimples in the cheeks, and all this gave him hope. "Hi there," the sticker said, smiling. "Quick, save me!" our hero cried. "With pleasure," the sticker said, and taking Lexington gently by one ear with his left hand, he raised his right hand and deftly slit open the boy's jugular vein with a knife. The belt moved on, Lexington with it. Everything was still upside down and the blood was pouring out of his throat and getting into his eyes. But he could still see after a fashion, and he had a blurred impression of being in an enormously long room. And at the end of the far room was a great smoking cauldron of water, and there were dark figures, half standing in the steam, dancing around the edge of it, brandishing long poles. The conveyor belt seemed to be traveling right over top of this cauldron, and the pigs seemed to be dropping one by one in the boiling water. And one of the pigs seemed to be wearing long white gloves on its front feet. Suddenly our hero started to feel very sleepy, but it wasn't until his good strong heart had pumped out the last drop of blood from his body that he passed on out of this, the best of all possible worlds, into the next.